Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Penny and this is Little by Little. I just want to take a minute and wish you all a very happy new year. I hope you had a great holiday season and were able to spend some good quality time with the people that you love. In my last video, I made the oak table that sat in the dining room of the homestead house. And in today's video, we're going to kind of carry on with that project and make the chairs that went along with it. Now, if you've been following my channel, you know how important it is for me to get all of the details right. And that can be really tricky sometimes because we don't have any pictures of the inside of the house. A lot of the pieces that were in the house are now in a museum, which is awesome. We were able to take some great pictures when we were there back in May. But a lot of the pieces are not, and they're not in the family anymore. And so then we have to depend on our memory. And my memories of that house are almost 50 years old. So when memory fails, Google often takes over. And so what I did was I went into Google Images to find, first of all, the dining room table, because that table is still in the family and I know exactly what it looks like. And I was able to find 5 different pictures of the table itself from different antique dealers. Unfortunately, in every picture, the chairs were different. So I don't honestly remember exactly what the chairs look like, but I did come up with a design that I felt fit the table and wasn't too fancy or too rustic. And so this is what I came up with. They are just very simple little wooden chairs, but I think they go really nicely with the table. So I have put some cutting instructions in the description below, but please know that everything that I've given you is for one chair. So you'll have to multiply that by however many chairs that you're making. So let's have a look at some of the materials and the tools that you'll need for this build, and then we'll get started. For this build, I've used a couple of different widths of plywood. I've used a small bit of the 1/16 of an inch or 1.5 millimeter plywood, as well as the 3/32 of an inch or 3 millimeter plywood. And then I'm also going to be using some wooden coffee stir sticks. These are quite small. They are only about 4 millimeters in width, and you will need 1 stick for each chair that you're making. And then I'm going to be using these bamboo cocktail sticks as well. And these are just very similar to the round toothpicks that you can buy, which you can certainly use if you don't have these. I just prefer these because they're a little bit stronger than the toothpicks. They don't break quite as easy. You'll need some sandpaper. You will need your X-Acto knife, a good sharp pencil, a ruler, a paintbrush if you're going to be staining the chair. You'll also need some wood glue and then whatever paint or stain you want to use. And then I added at the end a coat of Podge, and I tend to do that just to protect those pieces. And then of course my ever constant 1, 2, 3 setup blocks. So let's get started on those chairs. The first step in this build is to make the back leg and the backrest. And you'll see that while it's straight on one side, I have curved it on the left-hand side. So we're going to make 2 of those. And to do that, we're going to use piece marked A. And I'm going to mark just a little arrow on this piece of wood, because the measurements that we're going to draw on here to cut these pieces are different on the top and on the bottom. And I want to make sure I'm always clear about which side of this piece that I'm working on. Okay, so first measurement we're going to do is we're going to find the halfway point between the top and the bottom. Now this is a 3-inch piece, so if you're working in Imperial measurements, you're going to make a measurement at 1.5 inches. If you are using the metric system, that is 40.5 millimeters. And then we're also going to find the middle point of that line. So you can go ahead and draw the line if you wish. And then the center of that is going to be 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to make a small mark at the 3/8 inch mark. The next thing we need to do is we need to make measurements along the top and then on the bottom as well. So starting from the top, we're going to mark at 1/8 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, and 5/8 of an inch. In metric, that's 4 millimeters, 9.5 millimeters, and 15 millimeters. On the bottom, our measurements are 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, and 1/2 of an inch. So 6 millimeters, 9.5 millimeters, and 13 millimeters. And then we're going to just draw some lines. So our first line is going to come from the top left-hand side of that piece of wood, and it's going to measure down to the first measurement on the left on the bottom. So coming from the corner down to the bottom. And I'm going to make the same line on the other side. So coming from the upper right corner and coming down to this third measurement on the right hand side. And make sure your pencil is nice and sharp, and you want to leave room for your pencil line. Our next line is going to be from the top, and we're going to go in one measurement, so that's the 1/8 of an inch or 4 millimeter mark on the top left, and we're going to go down to the center point. And then we're going to do the same on the other side, coming in from the right, going in our 1/8 of an inch mark and going down to that center line. And our last measurement is going to be from that center point down to the middle of the bottom measurement. Now when I'm cutting this, I'm going to cut off these two sides first. Then I'm probably going to cut right through the middle. Even though we haven't drawn a line here, you can start from the middle and just go all the way down. It's going to be easier than just trying to cut just the bottom part, and then we can cut off these two sides. Now you can see I've changed my ruler because this one has the cork on the bottom, and it does stick to the piece of wood a little better than that smaller one that I was using. I always cut this piece so that the grain of the wood is going lengthwise. You'll find it much easier to cut and trim down if you do that. It's far easier to cut with the grain of wood than it is to cut against the grain. And I'll do the same on the other side. Then I'm going to cut it right down the center. And then we're going to cut off this angled piece here. What you're left with then is two curved pieces. Now these are pretty rough, so on mine I did go in and I sanded them. So I sanded all of the corners so that they're smooth, not rounded but smoothed, and the surface of all four of the sides and the top and bottom. And I found that if I took the two pieces and I put them together, and you can tell like outside because of that line that we drew across, that if you hold them together and sand, if you have the dexterity to do that, they will at the end of the day be the exact same size, which is always the plan. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to prepare this backrest piece for when the time comes. And I did want this to have a little bit of a curved top to it. And so what I did was I just took a piece of paper, folded it in half, and cut the shape that I wanted. And then once you unfold that, you can lay it across the piece of wood and trace that shape onto the wood. So again, just with my sharp pencil, I'll draw that shape on there. Now, because this is a thinner piece, this is the 1/16 of an inch, it's a lot easier to cut with an X-Acto knife, and you just have to be patient. Try not to push too hard, but just trace along the pencil line that you've made. And then you take some sandpaper and even those edges. Go in and sand that after it was cut, and I've just kind of taken off some of the sharper edges. Now if I turn it over, you'll see that I've made some measurements on the bottom of the piece. And I'm going to be using slats down the back of the chair, and I wanted to make sure that they were evenly spaced. Now, you don't have to measure if you don't want to. If you want to eyeball it, awesome, that's great. I admit I'm a type A personality, and so measuring is just something I do. So I have measured out, and I'm going to give you these in millimeters because it's just too small of a measurement to do in Imperial. So my measurements here turned out to be, starting from the left, 3 millimeters, 7 millimeters, 9 millimeters, 13, 15, 19, 21, and 25. And what that gives me is it gives me 3 millimeters on each side. It gives me 4 spaces that are 4 millimeters wide, which is the width of the slat that I'm using. And then we have 2 millimeter spaces in between each of the slats. So I've done that on that piece, and then I've also done the same on the lower brace, which is going to sit at the bottom of that back. And so all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the 4 slats that I've cut, and I'm going to glue them into place. So that's going to be pushed down flat against the mat. I'm just going to use the grid on my cutting mat to make sure that it's straight. You also want to make sure that once you've glued that down, that you just give it a little bit of a nudge so that the wood doesn't stick to the mat on you. So now we're going to put some glue on the bottom of those slats and attach the bottom piece. So we're going to bring in piece B, which is the seat. I'm going to be attaching the legs to the front of the chair first, and I want to make sure that they're even. So you can, if you want to use your grid, which is I think what I'm going to do, because it already is pre-measured for me. And I'm just going to go ahead and put my chair legs, which will be piece E, and we're going to glue those to the front. And I'm using that 1-inch grid as my guide, and I'm putting it back just about, I would say, 3 to 4 millimeters from the front as well. And you'll notice that these are not square, these are rectangle, and I want to make sure that they're going so that they're the same direction as the back legs. So I'm going to put the skinniest part of that rectangle to the front of the chair. Scrape away that excess glue because we are staining. We'll attach now the chair back to the back legs. So if you recall, when we were cutting these out, we had a line that we drew across the midpoint of that piece of wood, and I've left those marks there. And you want to make sure that when you're putting these together that you've got them both going the same direction, because the shape of them is a little bit different if you happen to flip one around. So how I do that is I just look for the outside lines and keep them to the outside. So on each of these now I've measured up 5 millimeters on each side, and that's going to be where the bottom of the chair back will sit. So I'll just put this one aside for a second. Now your chair back, this is how we glued them in together. But you can see now that if you flip it over, everything is flush. And I want that flush side to be the side that the back would sit against. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this onto this piece here and here using this 5 millimeter mark above the halfway point as my guide. And you'll see that I've put that in approximately the middle. We're going to add the seat now to the back of the chair. And you can see that I have made 2 tiny little notches in the back of the chair seat. I realized that when I went to put this together, that with that edge being rounded, I had very little contact between the chair seat and the chair back, and I felt like the glue would not hold it. So I just, with my X-Acto knife, and it was very easy, just went in and snipped out just a teeny tiny little piece on either side, so that now that square side of the chair back is going to actually sit inside that notch, and it will be a much better hold for the glue. So all I'm going to do now is just put some glue in those notches, and we'll go ahead and attach it to the back of the chair. And again, we're going to use those halfway marks that we made when we were cutting out those backs. That's where I'm going to fit those 2 notches in. Now, if you want to tip the chair up to let it dry, we can do that, and then we're sure that the back legs and the front legs are the same, sitting at the same height. And you can let it dry like that. Now we're just going to add some braces in around the chairs just to help support them. And I have not put the measurements for these pieces in the cutting instructions, because you will have to measure them before you cut them at this stage. If you try and pre-cut them, chances are they're not going to fit. And I'm just going to measure, I'm going to do it in millimeters. So for me, that's about 23 millimeters, about 23 millimeters, 22 and a half actually. So let's start with this one. I'm actually going to cut off the end of these. These bamboo sticks actually have a little bit of a decorative edge to the top of them, which is great if, you know, for some things, but for this, I don't want it to be decorative on one side and not the other. So I'm just going to cut that off. And then I'll measure my 23 millimeters or 22 and a half millimeters. We'll just test it to make sure it fits. Then I'll go ahead and glue that in. Now I put that in about 13 millimeters from the bottom, so I want to make sure that on this side I do the same. There's our braces installed, and our chair is ready for some stain. I use the same stain that I used for the table, so now it's a matching set. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.